Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome to another sharing, live Dhamma sharing on Facebook. This is the Awakening series, where we have been covering some very important and vital topics. We are covering the most fundamental teachings of the Buddha based on translations and lessons by Bhante Punnaji, where Bhante has offered very deep insights into the original teachings of the Buddha. And some of the translations may appear somewhat different from old school and also different from some common Western translations. But what is more important is Bhante's translations are actually very precise. And the reason mainly is because of his deep knowledge of the Pali language as well as Sanskrit and his impeccable command of the English language. So thank you for joining us once again. So what we have covered so far, basically we are talking about the process of perception, Pancha Upadana Kanda. Last week we covered quite a bit of that. This week we will continue on that. And of course, after that, we will also be talking about discerning between Mano, Chitta, and Vijnana, the three parts of our mental experience that we call the mind. The Buddha used these three words. So we are going to explore more deeply how they actually differ. And this is one of the hallmark of Bhante Punnaji's teachings. If you can understand the way he has explained how to discern between these two, you actually can gain some very deep insight into the original teachings of the Buddha. And finally, we will, of course, culminate in exploring more deeply the one of the most deepest teaching, and that is the Paticca Samuppada, commonly called the 12 links of dependent origination. Bhante calls it the concurrence of logical antecedents. We will talk about that when we come to that. So we will continue with this Pancha Upadana Kanda. The important thing is Bhante has always reminded us when we examine the teachings of the Buddha, always look at it from an experiential perspective. Look at everything that he teaches as experiencing rather than existential. So let's begin with today's sharing. So today we will be covering the Awakening series number 2. This is part 2 of a series. And this is the second part of our topic, the Pancha Upadana Kanda, the process of perception. Or rather, to put it more in a longer term, it is called the 5 constituents of the process of perception. Before we continue, I would like to share with you this link. Please use this link to download the PowerPoint slides that I'll be using this evening so you can actually follow along. So you can use this link to download and follow along all the slides that I'll be sharing, okay? So let's begin with today's sharing. We're actually talking about basically the Panchakanda, commonly called the 5 aggregates. But Bhante calls it the 5 constituents of the process of perception, because Panchakanda is referring to the process of perception, the process in our body and mind by which we begin to perceive objects in the environment, and we begin to create the objective experience out there and this subjective experience in here. So we're going to go deeper into this later, but we're going to focus more on this Panchakanda, the 5 aggregates. And these are the 5 constituents of the process of perception. Last week, we covered a few elements, Vedana, Saññā, and Saṅkhāra, using eye perception as the example, because the eye or the seeing is by far the most complex of the 5 physical senses. Now, after last week's sharing, I was receiving quite a few questions from people who were still a little bit, I wouldn't say they don't understand it, but they wanted a bit more clarification of Saññā, Vedana, and Saṅkhāra. So what we will cover today is a little bit more elaboration of Saññā, Vedana, and also Saṅkhāra, and we're going to look into, besides the perception of seeing, also the perception of hearing and the perception of touch. Okay, so these are also the very common perceptions that we rely on to sense what's going on in the world. Whereas the perception of smell, the perception of taste is really more of sensual experiences, sensual lust and sensual aversion. You see? But when we talk about understanding what's going on around us, primarily it is the perception of seeing and then hearing and touching. These are the important ones which we will cover today. So let's take a look at the perception of seeing again one more time. This time I will go more into verbal explanation, verbal elaboration, so you can understand it a bit more about stimulation of the eye sense organ. How the eye sense organ gets stimulated by light coming in from the environment, and we become aware of visual objects that we are seeing. So the first thing we need to understand, of course, without light we can't see. Therefore, the eye sense organ is about picking up light from the environment. Now, visible light is defined clearly as the electromagnetic radiation within this spectrum perceivable by the human eye. And this definition is the definition unanimously agreed by the International Commission on Illumination. It's a world body talking about light and illumination. So they finalized and came to a unanimous agreement on the definition in 1987. So basically it's about visible light, light that can be seen by the human eyes. This is really electromagnetic radiation, EMR. It is electromagnetic radiation, which is the same as radio waves, infrared, ultraviolet rays. Okay, and in this case, when we talk about visible light, it is within that spectrum that the human eye can perceive. So that's really what it is: electromagnetic radiation. Electromagnetic radiation is also the same term used to describe electricity, actually. It's basically the flow of energy, electron energy. Okay, light waves come in different frequencies. Waves, as I described in the last sharing, waves is going up and down, up and down. So the wavelength is how wide each cycle of wave is. Frequency is how many cycles happening within 1 second. So when we talk about light waves that have very high frequency, they usually have very short wavelength. So short wavelength is high frequency, long wavelength is low frequency. We'll explore a bit more about that. Lights fall onto the retina, right, of the eyeball. At the back of your eyeball inside, there's a thing called retina. Actually, we already covered that last week, so I won't repeat that too much. Okay, and of course, there's these optic nerves to pick up, to sense different light frequencies. Optic nerves carry the impulses, right? And once they pick up light, they transmit the impulse. The nerves carry it all the way to the brain because of the light stimulation of these optic nerves in the retina. And it is carried to the brain to be processed. And this processing is really trying to identify what has been perceived by the eye. So there is an identification process going on. Until it reaches the brain and it is being processed, what is happening from the moment light strikes the retina until the signal and the impulse reaches the brain, all that is the activity of the nervous system. The nerves, optic nerves. It's not yet in the mind. The mind, it becomes only aware after the brain starts to process it. Okay. So now we're talking about light being picked up before the mind is aware. So this is before you realize that you are seeing an object. Not yet. This is just sensation of light stimulations falling onto the eye. So Saññā is referring to this sensing different light frequencies by the optic nerves. And this is why Bhante Punnaji translates this word Saññā as sensation, meaning it's sensing light. It is like stimulations of the eye sense organ. That is the sensation, sensing. This word sensation is not referring to the emotional sensation, no. Nothing to do with emotions. As I pointed out, it is not yet being processed by the mind. So there is no mind involved in this. It's just sensing of light, and that light is transmitted into the brain to be processed. And as it is being processed, that is when the mind becomes aware of it. Until then, it is just sensing of light. So different frequencies of light, when it is being processed by the brain and the mind becomes aware of it, it interprets it as colors. In other words, various frequencies, we assign a certain label to it. It is green, it is blue, it is red, Color does not exist out there. What exists out there is basically the frequency, different frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. And these are light waves. Right? So out in the environment is just different frequency of electromagnetic radiation. The mind assigns a name, oh, this is blue, this is green, because of the different frequency that it is processing. Right? So, as I have shown you this chart before, there is this spectrum where it is visible, and that spectrum is very tiny. On the left side is the high frequency light waves. High frequency means very high frequency, very short wavelength. Right? So the high frequencies are the violets, the blue, then approaching the green in the middle. So it's primarily it's the blue and bright, the higher part of the green, that is the high frequency. Now, in this visible spectrum, the high frequency, we talk about this high frequency, so to speak, is referring only to blue and green light. But when we talk about high frequency light waves, and this is not visible light anymore, then we are talking about X-rays. We're talking about gamma rays. We can't see them. You can't see X-ray. It can hurt your eyes. It can destroy your eye even when they shoot X-ray into your eyeball. Right? It can destroy your retina, but you can't see them. Right? And because this high frequency is beyond the capability of our optic nerves to pick them up, so we can't really see them. So we can't sense them. Right? So they are outside visible range. On the right side are the low frequency wide wavelength, right? So large wavelength, low frequency. That means they oscillate slower than the high frequency light. And these are yellow, orange, and red. So on the extreme right, that is the red color. These are very low frequency light, or very low visible frequency light, visible light. Then if we talk about not only the visible light, but the whole of the light spectrum, then low frequency light is infrared, microwave, FM radio, television waves, and shortwave radio. Right? These are low frequency, large wavelength, which we cannot see. Right? You can't see infrared. The real infrared you can't see, because when you talk about infrared lamp, you're really not seeing the infrared lamp. You're seeing the red part, the visible red part of the lamp, but the real infrared is not really visible to the naked eye. And then microwave is not visible to the naked eye. Right? We use microwave to cook our food very quickly. Right? So these are long wavelengths the eye cannot see. It's only that little spectrum in the middle where you can see the blue, green, yellow, orange, and red visible light. Right? So realize that. The blue and the green are considered pleasant because they do not only they do not irritate, the nervous system, they actually soothe the nervous system, because the high frequency makes the retina, the optic nerves very soothing. Whereas the lower frequency, the large wavelength, are very unpleasant, right? So they irritate the optic nerves. So let's explore this a little further. So this irritation is referring to Vedana, pleasant or unpleasant feeling of this sensation we call Saññā. I hope we're already clear what is Saññā. Saññā is the sensing of light frequencies, and then the processing of light frequencies, but not yet interpretation. You only interpret what color, but it's not yet really interpreting an object yet. Not yet. This is just sensing light and interpreting the various light colors. That's all. So Vedana is the reaction of the optic nerves to light frequencies. Long wavelengths or low frequency, which is red and yellow and orange, they arouse the nervous system, the optic nerves. They agitate or irritate the optic nerves, therefore causing some kind of unpleasant feeling of the sensation. This is unpleasant Vedana. And then short wavelengths or high frequency light, which is blue and green, they relax and soothe the optic nerves. And therefore they are perceived as more pleasant, the feeling of pleasant sensation. Right? So this is what Vedana is. Now I want to clarify again one more time, the word Saññā often being translated as perception. That is definitely not a correct translation, because when you talk about perception, that word implies being able to identify the object, or but sensation does not translate into an object yet. It has to be brought together to produce the object. I will show you later with the sight of seeing that sensation is not yet really an object. It's just different colors that are being sensed. Similarly, Vedana is sometimes translated as sensation, right? Feelings, but the word sensation, in this case, when people translate Vedana as sensation, they're really referring to the arousal of pleasant or unpleasant sensation. But the real meaning of Vedana is really just the feeling of pleasantness and unpleasantness of the color. Okay, I repeat, Vedana is the feeling of pleasantness and unpleasantness of the color. So it can be pleasant, it can be unpleasant, or it can also be neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Some people call that neutral. But I never like to use neutral, because realistically speaking, when we talk about reactions, there's no such thing as a neutral reaction in that sense. But for lack of a better word, or to shorten that neither pleasant nor unpleasant, they make it short by calling it neutral. Okay, so I guess that's okay. The word neutral refers to neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So Vedana is really not whether you like something or you dislike something. It's not about liking a color or disliking a color, or different colors are being picked up, right? It is purely the reaction of the nerve cells, and that reaction affects you, right? So you are being affected by it. Even if, let's say, some people love red color, for instance. They love red color. They see red, they say, oh, beautiful color. They see green, oh, they don't like green. So those people who do that, when they see red, of course, they have this emotional liking. But Vedana here, in the context of the Panchakanda, is not referring to whether you like or you don't like that color. It's really about your nervous system reacting to it, whether it is reacting to it in a pleasant way with relaxation and soothing, or in an unpleasant way where it's agitated, irritated, and aroused. Okay, so I hope that Vedana is also clear now. Saññā, Vedana. So now let's re-examine seeing, the technology of seeing in your eye, so-called this human technology of seeing. As light enters the eye, it forms an image on the retina, And that image falls onto the back of the retina, where it is being picked up by the macula. And then in the middle is the fovea. Okay, now let's look at it more deeply. In the macula area, there are approximately 150 million rod and cone cells in the macula. So that big area, which is 5.5 millimeter. Well, 5.5 millimeter is not very big, very tiny. But relative to this microscopic, nanoscopic view, then 5.5 millimeter is quite big. Then in the middle of this macula is the fovea, that tiny little part in the middle. Right? So outside the fovea, in the macula area, outside the center part, which is called fovea, in the rest of the macula, there are rod cells. So rod cells sense shades of gray and blurry images, right? Not sharp and not color. It can pick up anything, any light wave, and it will be interpreted as gray shades, right? So you can see when you look at the screen, notice your peripheral vision. In your peripheral vision, it's blur. Your peripheral vision is actually the vision of the macula, not the fovea in the center. The fovea is the part where you are focusing. So in the peripheral vision, it is the blurry part, okay? And it's gray. Notice your peripheral vision, it is not sharp and it is not clear color, bright color, right? No matter how bright the environment, the peripheral vision sees grayish shades, okay? Realize that. So this is being picked up by the rod cells. But in the center of the macula is that tiny little part called the fovea, which is only 1.5 millimeter in diameter, so tiny. I can hardly even produce it with my finger without touching my fingers, okay? So there are three types of cone cells, right? These cone cells can sense sharp and specific frequency range. So these cone cells are sensitive to specific frequency range. Three types of them. Each type is sensitive only to a specific range of light frequency. Right? So the three types of light frequency that they are sensitive to are the red frequencies, the green frequencies, and the blue frequencies. So one type of cone cells can only be sensitive to red. Another type of cone cells they are only sensitive to green. Another type of cone cells, they are only sensitive to blue. All right? So in other words, what is being picked up by each cone cell is really just red or green or blue, and millions of them are being picked up moment to moment. Now, as you can see, you have 150 million rod and cone cells in each eyeball. Two eyeballs, if you have both eyeballs working, you have 300 million rod and cone cells. And when you talk about light entering the eyeball, striking the retina, light is really continuous radiation. High frequency radiation is striking the retina, right? If it is 1 megahertz, then it's striking the retina 1 million times every second. So in other words, every moment you have 300 million strikings. In other words, the eyeball is producing 300 million Saññā every moment. So moment by moment, 300 million, 300 million. So in 1 second, billions and billions of Saññā impulses are being produced. That's how complex the eye organ is, right? So billions and billions of Saññā sensations are being picked up and sensed and then transmitted to the brain to be processed. These are impulses, optic nerve impulses brought to the brain. 300 million every moment. And when we talk about moment, a moment is very, very short, right? For those of you who study the Abhidhamma, you will know what I mean, right? So each moment is very short. Every moment, billions and billions of them happening. So what is really being picked up is not a clear, full image. It is dots, bits and pieces being picked up by the fovea. I'm now referring to the sharp color part. What is being picked up are these, what we call pixels, bits and pieces, dots, pixels, one dot. So in other words, what we think we see as a picture is really made of these tiny little dots, right? Pixels, millions of them, 300 million one moment. And every second would be billions of them. And they are then transmitted, carried to the brain as optic nerve impulses to be processed. And then as the brain processes it, we become aware of it. It is the activity of the brain that gives rise to the consciousness of the mind or the awareness of the mind. So all these are very jerky. Right? Now Bhante calls it a wall, building a brick wall by laying bricks. I prefer to call it jigsaw puzzle. I think it's more appropriate when we talk about these pixels. We're really talking about jigsaw puzzle. Billions of these pieces of jigsaw puzzle being sent to the brain to be processed and put together as a clear image, a full, and this image has animation. It moves, right? So one frame after another, there is motion. So that's how it works. Let's take a look at the scientist video explaining this, okay?
As our eyes dart around, we make sure that anything interesting is lined up on our sharp spot, so we get a good look at it. And you don't know you're doing it, because the brain takes these jerky snapshots and creates a nice smooth movie of the world.
So the brain takes all these jerky snapshots. You see, the eye is darting around. You never see the full image clearly with both eyes. Even with one eye, you don't see the full image. Okay, so now let's do a test. Look at my face. So I'm going to give you my face as an example. Let's do an experiment, right? Just to prove that the eyeball is darting around. So I want you to look at my face now. Look at my two ears, right? Or better still, I put my two fingers. Can you see both my fingers, right, at the same time? At the same time, look clearly. You can use one eye. You can use both eyes. It doesn't matter. Can you see both my fingers at the same time? Or is your vision darting back and forth between the two fingers? Or maybe your vision is smack in the middle, somewhere around my mouth area, and then it is taking a peripheral vision of the two fingers. Can you see both my fingers clearly? Or both my fist clearly? Better still, I give you my fist. So can you see both my fists clearly? You can't. Your eyeball is darting around. So now you say, maybe because the fists are a bit far apart. Okay, forget about the fist. So happen I have a big nose. Now look at the two sides of the nose. Now it's much closer. Can you see both sides of my nose at the same time? Look, I come closer. Can you see both sides of my nose at the same time? You can't. Because your eyeball is darting back and forth. I hope now you understand what is meant by the eyeball is darting back and forth, picking up bits and pieces. It's actually picking up pixels by pixel of my face, brought into the brain to be processed together. That is really what happens to the eyeball being darting around. Okay? So I hope that darting around is very clear. Right? I can even, okay, you can say, oh, maybe the nose is too far apart. Yeah. So let's try these two fingers right next to each other. Can you see both my fingers clearly at the same time? clearly. I bring it closer. Can you see both clearly and sharp at the same time? No. Your eyeball is darting back and forth between the two. So even two adjacent portion of the image, your eyeball is still darting back and forth, picking up little jigsaw puzzle pieces. They are then brought into the brain to be constructed. Right? Constructed into what? Constructed into a mental image. This process of construction of billions and billions of jigsaw puzzle pieces being brought to the brain to be constructed, that process is called Saṅkhāra, mental construction of an image. Just very quickly, there are three types of Saṅkhāra, so I'm only referring to one of them. It's normally called the Chitta Saṅkhāra. Chitta Saṅkhāra is the construction of the Saññā Vedana, okay? So constructing into the image. So moment to moment, hundreds of millions of Saññā sensation and Vedana feeling combinations are being constructed because they are being brought to the brain moment to moment. Hundreds of millions being constructed to create a mental image, and there are millions of moments every second. So imagine how complex that construction is to produce the mental image called the rupa. And this really appears in your mind as a mental picture, a mental image, a mental picture. Now, the word mental image has two meanings. You can refer to the mental image as a visual image. That means it's an image produced by the eye. But in other instances, mental image, we are also referring to the image of hearing. We hear something. So there is a mental image of a sound. But now we are talking purely of mental image of a sight, a vision, a seeing. So rupa is referring to this mental image of what has been seen, right? Now, the word rupa again is conventionally translated as, or popularly translated by the Westerners as object, materiality, something physical. It's not. Rupa is really this mental image arising, this appearance that arises in your mind. That is mental image. In many languages, that the word rupa actually refers to the appearance of a mental image, not the physical object itself. For some reason, when the Westerners translated it as a physical object, that translation stuck. Everybody started referring to rupa as that physical object, right? So the construction process produced this picture of a mental image, and this construction process is called Saṅkhāra, mental construction of Saññā Vedana, and that is called Chitta Saṅkhāra. As I mentioned, there are three types of Saṅkhāra. Chitta Saṅkhāra is one type, right? Vaci Saṅkhāra is the construction of thoughts and mental speech. That means something you wanted to say. In other words, something that is spoken in your mind. Your mind is thinking of a thought, something verbal in the mind, verbalization, right? So that is Vaci Saṅkhāra. And another type of Saṅkhāra is Kaya Saṅkhāra. Kaya Saṅkhāra is actually referring to the process where as you breathe in, the air that you breathe in is then being processed into energy. The oxygen is extracted and converted into energy in your cells. And then that energy is distributed throughout your body. That's why it's called Kaya Saṅkhāra. And that energy is what gives us the physical energy to take action, to do things, to move the body, activity of the body. Right? So therefore, the three types of Saṅkhāra is, in this case, of Panchakanda, it is Chitta Saṅkhāra, the construction of Saññā Vedana. The second type is Vaci Saṅkhāra, the construction of thoughts and mental speech, not spoken words, thoughts and mental speech before you speak it out. That is Vachi Saṅkhāra. And then the third type is Kaya Saṅkhāra, which is really respiration, right? So the process of taking your breath. Now, it's not talking about the process of breathing. The process of converting the air that you breathe, extracting the oxygen, converting it into energy, and then distributing this energy throughout the whole body. That's why it's called Kaya Saṅkhāra. It's not referring to purely the breath or the breathing. It's really respiration, the process of converting air that you breathe in into energy that is distributed throughout your body. Okay, so those are the three types of Saṅkhāra. We will not talk about the other two. We will, for now, focus on this Chitta Saṅkhāra of constructing Saññā and Vedana. Right? Now, there's one more point I want to raise. I have asked Bhante when I had the chance before once, because I also read about the term Mano Saṅkhāra. Sometimes Bhante uses the term Mano Saṅkhāra. So I asked him, is there a difference between Mano Saṅkhāra and Chitta Saṅkhāra? Now, from memory, I recall his explanation was there's really no difference between the two, because in this context, the word Chitta is commonly used by the Buddha to refer to the mind generally. Right? The mind generally is called Chitta. Whereas when we talk about Chitta specifically, it's referring to emotions. Mano specifically, it is referring to cognition. But here, in the context of the Panchakanda, right, we're not talking about the emotions. We're talking about the mind. So here, Chitta Saṅkhāra is basically referring to the mental construction of images coming from Saññā Vedana combinations. And this is basically also can be called Mano Saṅkhāra. Okay, so I hope that clarifies it. Now I'm just mentioning this from memory. I believe that is what I recall is the explanation I got from Bhante Punnaji when I was able to ask him some years ago. Okay, so now it is constructed into what? With the rising of this mental image, we need to interpret that mental image. And this interpretation of a mental image becomes the perception of objects. So vijnana is the perception of objects perceived by the sense organ. So the mind is really a continuous flow of mental images. Think about it. What is happening in your mind? Your mind is simply a continuous flow of mental images. Right? That flow continues. You're always having some kind of mental images. If your eyes are open, that mental image comes from seeing. If your ears are paying attention, that mental image can also come from hearing. If you are coming into contact with some tactile objects, that mental image can also be the image of a tactile a touch, right? So when we talk about mental image, we're not just referring to seeing, we're also referring to the other four senses. So sound is a mental image, right? Touch is a mental image. Smell is a mental image. Taste is a mental image. Your mind becomes aware and interprets it. And that awareness, interpretation of this mental image is perception of objects. Now, actually, perhaps because this is perception of objects of the rupa, that's possibly why the word rupa is used to refer to the object, but it's not. It's the mental image of the object. Mental image of the object is not the same as the object, right? Let's talk about you seeing the dog, right? Seeing a dog out there. Are you seeing a dog out there? Or are you seeing light reflected from the dog entering your eyes? You see? Think about it. I'm asking you the question again. Are you seeing a dog out there? Or are you seeing light reflected from the dog entering your eyes? Now, to clarify it technically, if you are seeing light reflected from the dog entering your eyes, then you're not seeing the dog, you're seeing light reflections, right? Reflected light from the dog, reflected from the dog, entering your eye. The light is what is stimulating your optic nerves. On the other hand, if you think you're seeing the dog, my question to you is very simple. If you think you're seeing the dog, then my next question to you is, did the dog enter your eyes? You see, if the dog did not enter your eyes, you're not seeing the dog. What entered your eyes? You are seeing light reflected from the dog. Now, if something came into blocking light reflected from the dog to enter your eye, can you see the dog? You can't. So how can you now, one moment can see the dog, next moment you can't see the dog? Then you're not seeing the dog, you're seeing light reflected from the dog. Something is blocking the light. Because if you're seeing the dog is inside your eye. Huh? No. So you can't be seeing the dog. We never see the physical objects. We see mental objects, or rather, to use a more accurate term, we perceive the mental object. We perceive the mental image. Sorry, I'll just rephrase it. We perceive the mental image of the object. Therefore, it is the perception of an object, not the actual object inside your mind, just the perception. So realize that vijnana is not referring to anything other than the fact that you are now perceiving objects. So mental image are then categorized into perceptions. And when it is categorized, then we give it a name, right? So therefore, the mind identifies it as an object by giving it a name, okay? So papancha is the process by which we identify objects in a categorized manner by assigning a categorized label, right, or name, or nama. Sorry, I forgot to insert the word nama in the brackets. So it's actually assigning a label. And the Pali word for name or label is nama. Right? So you call, let's say I give you an example. It is categorized. When you see this object, what is this? Everybody can tell it is an alarm clock. But I'm very, very sure every one of you, other than my family members, every one of you are seeing this alarm clock for the first time because I've never shown this before. And yet, how do you know it's an alarm clock? Because this object looks like clocks that you have all seen in the past. And your mind has put it all into a category called alarm clock. Therefore, any object that looks similar, resembling this category, then you give it the name alarm clock, right? Not being very specific. You're not being specific about the alarm clock. That's really how we identify objects in categorized manner. And assigning a name, the word alarm clock is a label or a name we give to it. And in Pali, that is nama. Therefore, rupa is the mental image. Nama is the label, the name we give to that mental image. And that nama, rupa is the perception, right? So that is what makes up this vijnana. We interpret that object and give it a name. So let's take a look at this process of experience of how now we're just referring to seeing, but this is a general model of the process of experience. But let's use seeing. So stimulations from the environment entering the sense organ, the eyeball. So that's, you're able to see. And there is a process of Panchakanda and vijnana arises. Vijnana is this perception where you identify what it is. All right? So when you perceive an object, it's light reflected from the object entering your eye, and then your mind has this mental image arising. So in other words, when we talk about perception, it is really as a result of this mental image arising, and we give it a name. How do we give it a name? Because the cognitive process, the mano, the cognitive process actually assigns the label by referring what was perceived, this mental object, by comparing it with billions and billions of mental objects you've seen in the past. This process is so fast, so automatic, you don't even realize it. So it is compared, and then by finding the suitable category, then you realize that this object is an alarm clock, because you picked up the image of this object and comparing to categorized memory, and then the category called alarm clock comes up. The category called alarm clock comes up, right? So this process of referring to memory and then identifying it, this process is called papancha, okay? Recognition. Or if you want to pronounce this more accurately, recognition. That's what it is. We recognize something, but actually we recognize. Why recognize and not just cognize? Cognition is basically the mental image arising, and then when referred to categorized memory and it returns the meaning, right? That is recognition. That process of checking with your categorized memory, that is papancha. And this recognition, right? You become aware of what that object is, and that is called the concept. Now you have the concept of an entity identified as a dog. So the word dog is the nama. Therefore you have nama, rupa. Rupa is the mental image, and nama is the name you give to this mental image. And we have all the 5 physical senses, from the eyeball to the ears, hearing, and the nose, smelling, and the tongue, tasting, and finally the body, touching. So these 5 different sets of sense organs feed impulses, sensory impulses, into the brain to be processed, and that processing makes you become aware of objects from each of the senses. The awareness of object from each sense is the vijnana. You have a perception of object. If it is a visual object, your vijnana is chakku vijnana. Okay, so maybe we'll look at the next slide. Stimulation of sense organs. Now let's look at how all these 5 sense organs get stimulated. We know already the first one, sight, is because of reflected light that stimulates the cone and rod cells in the retina. And hearing is air vibration stimulating the eardrum. And touch is pressure, temperature, vibration, chemical stimulating your tactile sensory receptors under the skin. And smell is really the odor molecules being binding with the receptors in your olfactory bulb, receptor cells, sensing it. Taste is actually the flavor molecules reacting chemically with your gustatory sense receptors, taste in the taste bud. And these are stimulations that trigger sensation, Saññā, and arouse pleasant and unpleasant feeling, Vedana, in the nervous system. So Saññā, Vedana happening only in the nervous system at the moment. It is not known to the mind until it is being processed, okay? And that papancha is the process. So now let's take a look at the sense of hearing, sound. Sound is the transmission of, okay, before we go any further, all right, let's go back to this. I hope by now you are clear about sight, the seeing, reflected light. What is Saññā Vedana? Okay, now let's look at the sense of hearing. The sense of hearing, basically we are hearing sound. Sound is the transmission of vibrations or movement of molecules through a transmission medium such as gas, liquid, or solid. In other words, sound can only be picked up if there is a medium that can carry the vibration, that transmit the vibration, transmission of vibration, movement of the molecules, okay? So in other words, we're talking about air, so sound is really the vibration of the air. So Producing sound means you pull and push, pull and push, pull and push, causing vibrations in the air. So that vibrations in the air is transmitted until it hits your eardrum. And therefore, it needs some medium to transmit. Gas, that is air, is gas. Liquid, in the water, you can hear sounds in the water. Or solid, you can hear sounds through a piece of solid object. You can, right? Some sounds are too soft to hear, not because you can't hear it, because it's too soft. And the vibration is lost by the time it reaches your ear, like cotton wool. If you have a big bag full of cotton wool and you try to transmit sound on the cotton wool, by the time it reaches your ear, maybe your eardrum cannot pick it up, okay? So if it is a solid object, then your eardrum can pick it up. So dry air is combination of all these different molecules to produce, to combine into air, what we call air. And it contains also carbon dioxide. Primarily it's nitrogen and a lot of oxygen, and then with a little bit of carbon dioxide, water vapor, and several other gases. That is what is in the air right now. Of course, there's this term called love is in the air. But basically, we're talking about air, right? So it's made up of all these things. Sound wave is basically vibrating the air at various frequencies. So fast or slow, vibrating the air, right? And when we talk about air vibration, then the air vibration strikes the eardrum, right? There is a membrane called the eardrum. And this eardrum then shakes. Then this eardrum shaking actually is connected to 3 tiny bones called the ossicles. These 3 tiny bones, I will show you a picture in a moment. These 3 tiny bones called ossicles serve the purpose of amplifying the vibration, and the ossicles in turn are connected to a tissue, and then that part of your inner ear is called the cochlea. Cochlea is a spiral chamber containing fluid and millions of very tiny hair cells at the end of auditory nerves. So in other words, you have auditory nerves, at the end of it is a tiny hair cell inside of the fluid chamber of a fluid of a spiral chamber. So the vibration of the cochlea vibrates the fluid causes the air to wiggle, and the wiggling of the air creates an impulse on the auditory nerves, which is then brought to the brain. As the cochlea vibrates, the air cells sense that and transmit this vibration to the auditory nerves, causing an impulse to be sent to the brain through the auditory nerves. Saññā is Saññā in the sense of hearing is the sensation of auditory impulses. Okay, now I have another question for you talking about hearing. When somebody is playing the guitar, my question to you is, are you hearing the guitar, or are you hearing air vibrations produced by the guitar? I repeat my question. When somebody is playing the guitar and you're hearing him playing the guitar, my question to you is, are you hearing the guitar, or are you hearing air vibrations produced by the guitar? I think you know the answer. You can't be hearing the guitar because that guitar is not entering your ear. What is entering your ear? Air vibrations. You are hearing air vibrations produced by a musical instrument, or even a piano or a guitar. Either of them is something striking the string of a certain tension. When it strikes the string within a certain thickness and tension, that string vibrates at a certain frequency. And you can shorten the length of that string by pressing the notes in the case of the guitar, Or in the case of a piano, each note has a different length of the string inside the piano. The piano is also a hammer striking the string. So the vibration of the string is actually attached to a sound board. That means there is some surface where the vibration of the string causes the sound board to vibrate, and that sound board vibrates the air. It's actually not the string alone that vibrates the air. The string does vibrate the air, but that vibration is not powerful enough. It is the sound board vibrating that is vibrating the air, and it's this air vibration entering your ear. And what you are sensing is this sensation of impulses produced by the air vibration. That is Saññā. So now this is the ear. You can see the eardrum is a membrane connected to the ossicles, the 3 bones. And those 3 bones connected to this spiral thing called the cochlea, right? And basically that is your hearing. Let's take a look at the video of hearing, okay?
Sounds are just tiny movements of the air molecules around us. But our ears contain a wonderful system for detecting these faint ripples in the air. First, the sound waves are funneled down the ear canal to the eardrum. If they were slowed down massively, this is what they'd look like. The moving air makes the eardrum vibrate. These vibrations are then amplified by 3 hinged bones. The bones are connected to a curled tube called the cochlea, which is full of fluid. The vibrations of the bones send ripples through the fluid, and these ripples move rows of microscopic hair cells. As the hair cells are bent, they send nerve signals to the brain, which then works out what the sound is. It's an extraordinary contraption, but it works beautifully.
Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea about sound, how sound is being picked up by the ear, vibrating the hair, and then that hair is at the end of each auditory nerve, sending the impulse to the brain. Now, sound is represented in terms of frequency, just like light, right? Sound is vibration of air, light is the vibration of electromagnetic radiations. So there is a frequency, again, wavelength frequency, same interpretation. Large wavelength is low frequency, small wavelength is high frequency. But sound also has the amplitude, loudness. In the case of light, it also has brightness, right? So sound is represented in terms of frequency and amplitude. In hearing, the sensation, Saññā, refers to sensing of air vibration in the form of frequency, which is pitch. High-pitched sounds sounds like that. And then low-pitched sounds sounds like that, okay? High-pitch, low-pitch, okay? And then loudness, soft or very loud, you know? So soft and loud. High-frequency, high-pitched sound or high amplitude sound, loud sound. So in other words, high pitch or loud sound irritate the nervous system in the auditory nerves. It is unpleasant. And this unpleasant feeling is Vedana. So Vedana in hearing is referring to the irritation of the auditory nerves because of high pitched sound. Whereas low pitched sound, low frequency sound, or soft sound, low amplitude sound, soothe the nervous system. So you just recall, if you listen to some nice music for relaxation, isn't that music not loud and blaring, right? Usually it is not very high pitch. Some high pitch sounds are very irritating. One of the most it is no offense meant to the musicians. Some of these musicians are very brilliant. But the Chinese instrument called erhu, the Westerners have another version called the violin. When you play very high notes, it can be very irritating. It's very irritating, right? Whereas the low pitch, like the drum or the gong, boom, boom. That is very soothing. Now, I want to warn you about your voice. People with high-pitched voice, they speak like that very high-pitched voice is very irritating. Whereas people with low-pitched voice, they speak with a very mellow tone and it sounds a lot more pleasant. You see? That's why if you notice all the most famous radio announcers, right, radio MCs, the really most famous ones, they have a very mellow, low-pitched voice. Very rarely do you ever find a good announcer has high-pitched voice, because as soon as you have very high-pitched voice, often a very good studio will reject you as the announcer because your high-pitched voice can be irritating. Now, this is no offense meant to anybody. Some people are born with high-pitched voice. So do be very careful if you have a very high-pitched voice. Because when you speak a lot at a high-pitched voice, it can cause people to feel very irritated. Just imagine, if you go from one group to another group of friends having a conversation, if you go to one group where all the people have very high-pitched voice, how do you feel about the atmosphere of the sound you're hearing? If you go to another group where you hear a lot of them have very mellow, low tones, and they are speaking, how do you feel about that atmosphere of the sound that you're hearing, you see? So I hope you get what I mean. Right? Okay, we're finished with sound. I hope you are clear about the Saññā and Vedana of the sound. Okay? So now we talk about touch, right? Because these three receptors, the seeing, the hearing, and the touching, help us identify things in the environment. Not so much the smelling and the tasting. Smelling, tasting usually associated more with food, right, and pleasantness of the environment. But in terms of what is happening out there, usually these three senses give us a very complete picture of what's going on. Now we're talking about the touch. Touch is when you touch something. The touch receptors under your skin. There are several types. There are actually many different types. I'm just showing you the four major ones. The first type is really sensing temperature. So in other words, when you touch something, you can feel whether it is hot and then you draw your hands away, or you can feel something that is cold, you also sometimes draw your hands away. But of course, when it's ice cold, it might stick your skin. But when you touch something very cold, also your hands will move away. Okay, so it's sensing temperature. I'll just go through the various sensations first before we talk about the Vedana. So these are the Saññā, sensing the temperature. The next is sensing vibration, commonly called touch, but actually you're sensing vibration. So whether there is motion, something is moving, or something that is stationary and still, right? So you're sensing vibration. So the second type. The third type, you are sensing pain. Now, pain is sensed through chemical reactions. So in other words, if there's chemical reactions, it actually causes pain. Pain is also sensed through texture. If something is sharp, poking, needles, right, thorns, right, cactus, then it's painful. Whereas, so this is really pain. So both chemical and texture, that is what pain is. And then you are also sensing pressure, whether it is something tightly squeezed into your body or something that is not squeezed into your body, right? So it is sensing this pressure. So all this combined together give you the sensation of touch. Even if you look at each and individual one, we go back to the first one, we're talking about the sense where you are sensing temperature. So what is Vedana? Vedana is extreme temperatures. If it is very hot, the Vedana is unpleasant, correct? Hot, very unpleasant. If it is very cold, it is also unpleasant. It's got nothing to do with whether you like something hot or you like something cold. See, some people like to drink hot drinks. Some people like to drink iced drinks. They don't like hot drinks. And those people who like hot drinks, most of them don't like cold drinks. And my father is a classic example. You know, he used to drink very hot drinks, steaming hot. If you give him something lukewarm, he doesn't like it. If you give him something with ice, he refused to drink it, okay? Whereas my son-in-law, he loves iced drink. Sorry about that, if I've referred to him. Sorry, if you're listening, I'm sorry about that. But basically, my son-in-law, he loves iced drink. Every night, he would fill up a big flask of iced drink, right? So he likes the iced drink. So he's sensing temperature, okay? So these cold things, they like, but Vedana has nothing to do with liking or disliking. It has to do with your nervous system reacting. If it is hot, the reaction is unpleasant. If it is very cold, the reaction is unpleasant. But if it is somewhere in the middle, lukewarm, it is more pleasant. That's what it is. Right? Likewise, when we talk about vibration, right? So it depends, because certain vibration can produce tickling. So when something vibrates the skin very quickly, it becomes very ticklish. So that ticklish, if you like it, that has to do with liking, right? But when we talk about vibration, if the vibration is too fast, it is unpleasant. But some people like that fast vibration because it becomes ticklish. Some people like to be tickled. Some people hate to be tickled. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about high-speed vibration is unpleasant. Likewise, we're talking about sensing pain, right? Chemical reaction, painful. And then we talk about sensing pressure. If the pressure is hard, then it is painful, it is unpleasant, right? So that's the Vedana of touch. So I hope I have covered enough of what is this Vedana, Saññā of the various senses. All these are brought to the brain, being processed into the big picture Vijnana, right? So let's listen to Bhante Punnaji explain about these processing in the mind, how the mind processes mental images, okay?
The Buddha used 3 words to refer to what is called the mind. Chitta, Mano and Vijnana. These are the 3 things. And if we examine what these 3 things are, these are 3 activities of the body. There are 3 activities of the body that we refer to as mind. One is Vijnana. Vijnana simply means that we have in this body 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body itself. These senses, when stimulated by the environment, the senses react to that stimulus. That reaction is what is called Vijnana. Chakku Vijnana, the eye reacting. Sota Vijnana, the ear reacting. Gana Vijnana, nose reacting. Jivha Vijnana, tongue reacting. And Kaya Vijnana, the body reacting. That reaction is the main thing that we call Vijnana. Today it is translated as consciousness, which is not correct. It is really perception, not consciousness. Perception.
Now, Bhante pointed out Vijnana is perception. So let's look at what he said, right? Basically, we're talking about that there is no thing called the mind. Mind is really the activity of the body. We only have this body. The activity of the body produces the experience of the mind, right? The mind is really activity of the body, the nervous system, and the rest of the body. Now, the Buddha used 3 words to describe what is the mind: Chitta, Mano, and Vijnana. We'll come to a more detailed explanation in a moment. And these are 3 different three activities of the body. They interact, right? So it's not like 3 exclusive, isolated activities. It's 3 interacting activities. So vijnana is the reaction of senses to the reaction of the senses to stimulations from the environment, producing an awareness. It is incorrectly translated as consciousness. Bhante pointed out that vijnana is really referring to perception. And we talked about perception already a moment ago, right? Interpretation of mental image, producing the perception of the object. That's really what vijnana is. It is. The word consciousness means more than that. I'll come to that, right? There is one type of vijnana called consciousness, but the rest that associated with the five senses, they are called perception. Okay, we come to that in a moment. So there are really three parts of mental experiences. The vijnana is the process of perception arising. Basically, this is awareness of what was perceived through our sense organs. Mano is the cognitive process by which it processes the mental image. So it is the categorized identification of the perceived image, rupa, by assigning a name or label, nama, to the perception. And once this assigned, it becomes a perception of objects, because you now know what that object is. And cognizing the experience into concepts, cognizing the experience with concepts. And with concepts, you have choices, right? What you're going to do, what are you going to do in response to what you have seen, heard, smelled, taste, or touch? So this is the activity of the mano, or the cognitive process of mind. The mano is the thinking part of the mind, the rational part of the mind that is aware and that is thinking and making decisions, creating concepts, and so on. And then chitta is the emotional process of the mind. Chitta is the affective process, commonly called emotions, referring to the mood and the temperament, right? The emotional reaction to feelings arising from cognition. In other words, when you are aware of an object and you know how it feels, then your reaction to it, leading to mood and temperament, right? And this reaction is then associated with whether you like something or you dislike something. When you see a red color, your nervous system may feel unpleasant, but if you happen to like red color, your reaction to red color will be favorable. If you don't like green color, your reaction to green color will be unfavorable, even though green color is soothing to your optic nerves, right? And at the same time, not only do you react to what you have perceived, right, you also personalize what was perceived, right? So the reaction arises and is manifested in the form of mood and temperament. Mood is how you feel about something. Temperament is your reaction, your urge to react. Your urge to react leads you to take action, and that action is emotional reaction called tanha. So you have a mood, whether you like something, it is pleasant, you enjoy this, or you don't like it, you hate it, you have a foul mood towards it, and your temperament is negative towards it. Whatever it is, you always personalize. So in the next sharing, we'll talk more about these different activities of mind. I won't go much deeper than this because it's a very long explanation there. So what happens is that each sense organ brings the impulse to the brain to be processed, and then the mind becomes aware. Right? In the case of your eyeball, the mind becomes aware of sight, seeing an object. And then the other senses, sound, and smell, taste, and touch. Then the mano is the part of the mind, the sixth sense. There are six sensual realms. The five of them are physical. The sixth one is mano, mental. And that is the one that puts it all together, right? And this is called the cognitive process, where it interprets it and puts it all together by referring to categorize the past memory, categorized past memory, right? And the process is called papancha, referring, assigning name to it. I see a dog, I hear a violin, I smell something tasty, I smell something that is very pleasant, aromatic, or I taste something that is sweet, right? I touch something that is soothing, something that is soft, or I touch something that is sharp and pointy, okay? So let's take a look at this sense perception and consciousness. What's the difference?
The Chakku Vijnana is a Vijnana. That is what you see with your eye. What you hear with your ear is also Vijnana. But that is called Sota Vijnana. What you smell with your nose is also Vijnana. But that is a different Vijnana, it's called Gana Vijnana. Then what you taste with your tongue is also Vijnana, but it is different, it's a Jivha Vijnana. Then what you feel with the touch, that is also Vijnana. But it is called Kaya Vijnana. So, Vijnana can be different Vijnanas. Then, what you think with your mind is also Vijnana. That is called Mano Vijnana. So, there are different kinds of Vijnana. No? But Mano Vijnana is not perception. It is conception. That is the difference.
Bhante pointed out that each physical sense vijnana is perception, but the mano vijnana is consciousness. Let's take a look at the, okay, let's go through this process first, right? So vijnana is really referring to the awareness of perceived, what is perceived through the sense organs, perception, the perceiving process. Mano is really the cognizing process as well as conceptualizing, creating concept, conceiving, right? Creating concepts, and as a result of different concepts, you have different choices how to respond. Then chitta is referring to the affection, where you're feeling about something, whether it is pleasant, whether you like it, you don't like it, that leads to your mood. And what are you going to do about it? Your reaction, that leads to your temperament. So your urge to react, your emotion. And you also personalize every experience. You say, this is mine. I am playing the piano. I am driving the car. I am doing this. I am feeling that, right? I am enjoying the music. So the I, me, or mine is there. Okay. So what Bhante referred to earlier on is that each of the 5 sense organs, or 5 senses, the vijnana is perception, sense perception. So the eye, from the eye, it is the eye perception, chakku vijnana. For the ear, it is the ear perception, sota vijnana. For the nose, it is gana vijnana, nose perception, tongue perception, body perception. Only the mind, the mano vijnana part of it, where you identify an object by way of identification with papancha, and then recognition, assigning a label, a name to this mental image, and then cognizing the experience with concepts, that is consciousness. That's what consciousness refers to, right? So consciousness is really the big picture of that experience through your senses. It's not referring to each sense organ's experience. That is not consciousness, that is perception. So I hope that is clear now. So this is really the process of perception. I will elaborate a little bit more about Vijnana and also going on to Chitta, Mano and Chitta in the next sharing. So you'll hope you will come back. So I hope you have understood basically these 5 constituents of the process of perception, right? And I hope this has been helpful to you. Remember to download the slides if you haven't already downloaded. That is tiny.cc/awakening. And just take this. All this came, there's a lot of information in this book that you can download. That is the level 3 Aryamagga Bhavana book. So please download a copy of this, and you can find a lot of it, a lot of information inside this book, right? So with that, I end my sharing. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me by my email. Send me your questions, or through Facebook. If you have Facebook account, drop me a private message on Facebook. Meanwhile, we have spent the last hour and a half together sharing the Dharma, and we have accumulated good merits. We also recognize that many people around the world are suffering. So let us dedicate these merits we have accumulated and share them with people who are suffering from the coronavirus pandemic. Put our palms together and let's recite together. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dharma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Let's recite this dedication together. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much for joining us. I wish you well. May you be healthy, stay safe. May you be peaceful, comfortable, and happy. Good night. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.